Hey everyone, welcome to the Around the Table podcast. I'm your host, Francisco, otherwise known as Paco. This episode is a continuation of my conversation with the great and brilliant Justin Docherty. In the second half of the conversation, we continue discussing the power of Christianity and God and its ability to redeem pain and bring forth purpose. We discuss how God shows himself in these difficult moments to reveal aspects of himself and provides a greater depth. Justin also discusses the importance of investing our hope in the kingdom of God that is advancing forward into our reality and world. If you haven't listened to the first part of the conversation, be sure to do that, whether that's before this episode or after. You'll really enjoy this man's perspective, insight, and vulnerability in detailing the trial that his family has and is going through. This will help you appreciate the strength, faith, and confidence that he has in Jesus in the midst of unforeseeable and life-changing circumstances. So, without further delay, let's jump back into the conversation. Enjoy. So, you didn't mention this, but all of this was happening during, you were a pastor, you're serving as a pastor actively, leading a church, leading a congregation, you're, involved in ministry, your church ministry, and you get this good, you get this news, this really difficult, news, one conversation, it's crazy how life changes so quickly.
Yeah, sure.
From one conversation, things completely change. We're aware that no matter who you are, no matter how, essentially, whether you're a pastor, a believer, whatever, there are some things that kind of come and shake a little bit of your faith. Did you ever have a moment where maybe your faith was shaken as a result of, this news that you and your family had received?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting question because you would imagine so. The reality is, though, I think because I just don't believe that being a good Christian means having a comfortable life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't.
Right.
And then, and going back to what I was saying with regards to Christianity actually being the best description for reality, some incredibly painful things happen. So when these things happen, I didn't really have the question like why me, why us, why that kind of stuff. I think what I did question and where I doubted was not on the whether God exists and
right.
But I did question the character of God. Is he really good?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's some of the things that I questioned about, and I think your circumstances are not the best place to get answers for those questions. Is God good? You can ask that question to direct that question at many different things. Most people direct that question to their circumstances. So it's their circumstances that answer that for them, or their emotions, or whatever it is. I always think it's best that if we have questions about God, to take those questions to God. Yeah. So let him answer those questions. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think there's space for doubt, and I think there's space for questioning, right, and there's space for deconstruction. And I think all of those things are super important. Yeah. And I think deconstruction is an essential element of growth. I think there are things that have to be deconstructed. Sure. Ideas, lies, constructs that we believe that are either too simplistic, they're not comprehensive enough, they don't allow room for other experiences, other realities. So I think it's healthy to have moments of deconstruction. Right. But when that process is in place, I just think it's wise to take that process and those questions to God, because he speaks into it. Because God ultimately is responsible for deconstructing that which is untrue. He assumes that responsibility. He in this process of discipleship, God wants us to. This process of discipleship is as much a process of deconstruction as it is reconstruction.
Reconstruction, sure.
And so God takes responsibility. He actually initiates a lot of deconstruction in our own lives, because certain things that we believe are too simplistic, or they're not based upon truth, or the whole truth. So when that happens, it's an opportunity to experience reconstruction around truth. And I'm telling you, like, God is an unbelievably good and beautiful architect, artist, and if we give him the fragmented pieces of our lives, he promises to create something beautiful and good. It might take time.
Yeah.
It might be a really painful process of deconstruction and questioning, and entering into the wilderness or doubt, or whatever metaphor we use for those seasons. But the process can be very painful. But I'm telling you, it's why he also asks us to trust him.
Yeah.
Because if we entrust into him the process of reconstruction, something unbelievably beautiful, glorious is recreated, recrafted, and that's an invitation that that all of us can accept. That's a process that all of us can participate in.
You said something really, really, I think, really powerful and important. Something that we should all, kind of dwell on and think about, is that whenever we have moments of doubt, we ask the question we ask God the question, not our circumstances. Because if we ask our circumstances, it's going to completely warp, the image of God, of who God really is. It's going to absolutely distort it. And I know you had mentioned this before, just in our conversations when you've talked about like definitions, right? Even just this idea of goodness, how God challenges our definitions.
100%, yeah.
He challenges them because sometimes our definitions are so restrictive, and in the context of what you're talking about, right now with the difficulty that your family's has been going through, this it could leave somebody very easily to doubt the goodness of God. However, that's because maybe our definition is so narrow.
100%.
When the reality is that it's a much broader, much fuller definition. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, so we need to ask ourselves, where do we get our definitions of good? So when we say, if God is good, why would he allow this to happen? Well, where do you get your definition of good?
Yeah.
And it's quite likely that you're getting your definition of good from a very contemporary source, that your definition of good has been passed on to you by a culture that has very narrow parameters of what goodness actually is, what it's comprised of, what its goal is. So when we enter into difficult times, when things are being deconstructed, our definitions are also one of those things that are being deconstructed, so that they can be reconstructed, so that they resemble reality more. So holiness, grace, we all have love. We all have definitions of what they are. But I guarantee that that for most of us, if not all of us, they're way too narrow. And God desires to expand our hearts by expanding or deepening our understanding of the true of what things are, how we should truly define the nature of things.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think that's really powerful. We know, like you were saying, truth is Jesus. Jesus is truth. Truth is found in the scriptures. If there's something that doesn't necessarily align with that, it doesn't mean that the scripture, you don't look at the scripture and say, well, I think that's wrong. You have to look at, the circumstance or whatever else it is that's there.
Yeah. And I think for me, because I met Jesus, I I just had an experience with the Lord. I, several experiences with the Lord. I was utterly convinced that that there was that Jesus was real, and that so whenever I've approached a situation, a circumstance that I didn't understand, I couldn't reconcile myself to, I've always thought that it's my understanding that needs to change. It's I've never really I never really, but I think I've limited the times where I've expected God to shift to align with my expectation, to align with my definition. I just don't think that's the way Christianity works. I don't think that's the way life should work. I don't think we should try and force life to align to our expectations and definitions. I think we should be humble and allow or ask God to align us to it. I think that's infinitely more beautiful. I think because our definitions are so narrow and shallow that even if we could shape reality to those things, it's utterly boring and so limited. And God's idea and picture and desire for us is beyond any kind of expectation that we could have. So we should expect to have our expectations broken, annihilated, and be open to what God wants to construct in its place.
Yeah. Well said. Just in a very practical way, there may be some listeners, people listening to this episode that may be going through or have, will go through in the future, difficulty, in times of trouble, times of grief, times of sorrow. And it's pretty fair to say that we'll all go through that no matter what. That's just, kind of a part of life. That's what life is. At times we have these moments where we experience loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a career, a job, of dreams, of visions, moments of grief where we're grieving different things, and what I want to ask from you and see if you can kind of provide us with maybe some tips on how to deal with maybe some of those tough moments that inevitably are going to come our way at some point.
Yeah, 100%. I think everybody's situation's different. So it's you have to honor the experience of each individual. But I think Christianity does a beautiful job at kind of expressing where woundedness and wonder meet, where they connect. And I think that understanding the nature of the gospel and how God reveals himself to us, I think is super helpful for how we actually experience pain and difficulty. Because one of the things that the gospel does is it reveals to us is that God is actually most manifest in our challenges, in our brokenness. And so many of us pursue the divine in pleasure. We pursue the divine in the fulfillment of dreams and in the mountaintop experiences. We're always looking to experience that promised land, that promised place in those things, those kind of idols sometimes. And what the gospel does is it says, well, actually, that thing that you're looking for is actually to be found in your brokenness. So it's really, really interesting, that when we accept the situation and circumstance, when we accept the brokenness, allow it to inform us of our helplessness, our limitation, our brokenness, the truth of who we are. It's in that moment that we discover grace. So for an example, in a moment where we've failed terribly, whatever kind of failure, moral failure, and we feel utterly distraught and broken. It's actually in those moments that we experience the grace and the unconditional love of God. Mm-hmm. He is in that broken place. Loneliness, that's where we experience the comfort of God. So I think it's part of it is understanding that our pain is not something to be afraid of. That difficult times are not something to be afraid of, because they're actually become holy places where God reveals himself to us. So we see this again and again in the scriptures. We see God revealing himself to Moses in the wilderness. We see Jacob having visions in the desert. We see God speaking to Jonah in the belly of the whale. All of these really difficult, travailing places, we see God coming through. And I just see pain and challenge as a place where God meets us. Yeah. And I think I'm not going to run from the place that God's going to meet me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for God in it. I'm going to look. I'm going to see where He's hiding in it. Right. I'm going to find Him in it. And so I think that's the most important thing. Is so many people try to escape, flee pain, challenge, difficulty, inadequacy, brokenness. But actually, that's the place where God is to be found. And so don't look to get out of your situation primarily, but look to find God in it. Yeah. I think that's really, really important. Second thing is just most people treat difficulty as an adversary, as an enemy, and I just don't think that is what challenge actually is. I think trials often come loaded with treasures, with depths of understanding, with there's power. There are powers in every trial, in every challenge. They can be destructive powers, but they can also be powers that can be used for our good. Yeah. So I think it's also not looking at a challenge as an enemy, but as something that you can plunder, something that you can rob of its treasures. So I think every trial has its own treasure. So what treasure is it that we can steal, that we can mine from that ground, from that broken ground? And then lastly, I would say, for sure, trials transform us 100%. We all know that, that we call it the refiner's fire, that there's a transforming power in the trial. Yeah. But the reality is that as Christians, we've been called to transform the trial. So we take something that the world sees as a curse, and we make it into a blessing. We make, the hospital room as a place of pain, and we make it into a place of praise. Right. Yeah. So we transform our trials into something precious. Yeah. And we see that in the life of Jesus. Right. We see him turning a cross into a fountain. We see him turning a betrayal into a moment of incredible benevolence. Yeah. We see him turning his wounds into our healing. And so there's recognize the power, in the pain. Right. The power that it has to transform us, to impart treasures, and for us to transform it.
That's a good word. I think that's a really good word. Yeah, our natural kind of inclination is to run from difficulty, run from the challenges, run from those things. Yet, like you said, there's treasures in the trials, in there. And I just kind of thinking out loud, but I would even say, like, even some of the troubles that we ourselves put ourselves in, that, through our own mistakes, our own kind of, mess ups, even within those areas, there are still some nuggets of wisdom that we can
100%.
mine from there, that we can pull from that.
Oh.
You can those situations can be redeemed.
Oh,
You can
100%.
redeem those things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 100%, right? I mean, what a wonderful gift that Christians have been given, you know, and how they can articulate or how they can express the nature of God in them is that they too can get to transform trash into treasure, you know, and yeah, for sure. When we make mistakes, we mess up.
Yeah.
Man, you mind that thing for humility. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
yeah, totally.
You know, mine it for humility, mine it for, you know, and humility is the ingredient, is the salt of every relationship. You know what I mean? So this, anything you know can be redeemed, and I just think that's one of the beautiful things of being a Christian,
Right.
which is just missing in most other, if not all other worldviews.
Yeah.
You know, most other processes, philosophies are all about ascending pain. Ours isn't. Ours is about transforming it. You know, God says, I will give you beauty for ashes.
Right.
You know, he will turn our mourning into dancing.
Yeah.
You know, so he transforms something. He doesn't just cause us to break free from it. He causes it to be transformed by our presence in it. And I just think that's just such a powerful dynamic. And I think Jesus modeled that well. And I think we can also embody what he did.
Yeah. The only reason why I even kind of added that little aspect of even the mistakes, the troubles we get ourselves in.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw that in there because I do feel like just kind of in our current, you know, kind of church culture, we tend to see ourselves as victims, as a life happening, you know, to us or things happening to us. But if we're super honest about it, I mean, come on, we put ourselves into some really funky situations, you know, when we choose to not act in wisdom, when we choose to, you know what I mean? Like,
Dude.
play around with our sin a little bit, you know what I mean? Because it's, you know, because it looks cute right there. We just kind of tend to pick it back up and mess with it. And the next thing you know, it kind of blows up in our faces. But even, like you said, even in those situations, you can still mine, like you said, humility. You can mine different things out of their knowledge. You can mine wisdom out of those situations.
100%, man, 100%. Yeah, even when you get caught up in a sin, right, and it becomes an habitual sin, you know, which we're so quick to condemn in other people. Yeah. And yet Paul says, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. Yeah. You know, so it's not really until we discover that we're powerless over it that we actually then can receive power from God for it. You know, and so, you know, we do a really good job at patting ourselves on our back when we're doing really well.
Right.
And we just transition from one form of slavery, whether it be sin, to another form, which is self-righteousness. Right. You know, and it's all slavery. Yeah. There's only freedom found in grace. And so, in every situation, there are treasures to be mined, and bitterness blinds you to the treasures. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as well. Like, bitterness blinds you to what God is giving you in that moment, what God wants to do through you in that moment. Yeah. And trust enlivens your eyes to see the movement, the potential of that situation. To bless, to benefit, and to prosper you. Yeah, beautiful. It reminds me of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and this is my paraphrase of Paul's words, saying that we've been afflicted in order to help those that are, you know, experiencing affliction. Yeah, to kind of guide people along that process. Oh, yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, one of the things he says is we encourage or comfort with the comfort that we have received. That's what it is. And and I just think that's the divine pattern of things, is that we minister from that which we have been ministered to. And so, if we receive comfort, well, our ministry becomes a ministry of comforting. If we've received healing, then we actually minister out of that healing and minister healing to others.
Yeah.
And if we've been in situations that have warranted a healthy dispensation of wisdom, well, our ministry becomes a ministry of dispensing wisdom.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, the tougher the spot you've been in, the more divine resources that you've required because you've been in that situation, the more empowered you are to minister to others. And I just think that that's so wise of God, that he selects people to experience some really difficult things so that they can be enriched by divine resources, like life-changing, world-shifting resources that they themselves need personally. But once those things have established, matured them, beautified them, shifted, transitioned, transformed them, they become dispensers of those same riches in a broken, beaten up world. So I think God's wise. I think he's wise in not allowing some to suffer so much, because he knows that suffering would certain degrees of suffering would not have the power to impact them. I think he gives us enough suffering in that he also equates the trust and the faith that he also gives us as well. So if he's given us a specific amount of a trial, he will give us also enough trust or faith needed to endure that and to be enriched by that trial at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful and an encouraging word to those listening that could be going through something really difficult. Maybe not today, but maybe in the future, something that they may experience some level of difficulty. Just to kind of stay in it, stay in it. Just like like if it was a lemon, right? Just squeeze all of the juice out of the knowledge, all of the wisdom, 100%. All of the beauty out of that situation that you can. It may be unpleasant at the time, at the moment, but when you've gone through that trial, when you've gone through the valley, the song of praise that comes out at the other end is a testimony. It really is a powerful testimony to the world, to your surroundings, to the people that you encounter. And we had talked about an example of this is Job, going through things that are unimaginable, things that are extremely difficult, having lost friends, family, all of his possessions, everything. He lost it. His body was afflicted to that point as well. Well,
I think Deb right. The pattern that we spoke about being rich by our trials, finding the treasures in the trials, and then becoming a resource that God uses to bless a community. That's seen beautifully in the story of Job.
Yes.
Because often we talk about how Job himself was personally enriched after the trial, that things were restored, and he had, I can't remember how much it was 3 times as much as what he had before he went through that trial. Well, if he was a generous guy before, well, just think at how much he blessed his community. Just think at how much he spoke wisdom to his community, to his grandchildren, to his neighbors. How much of he was looked to as a leader within his people. So God never took him through that just so that he would personally enrich Job, but that Job would also enrich others. And I think that's wonderfully smart by God. I think it's incredibly compassionate by God. I think it's discerning, that he would just like he did with his son Jesus, that he would allow some or one to suffer so that many could benefit. And I think if you're one of those people who are suffering now, I just want to encourage you, do what Paco said and stay in it, because not for the sake of staying in it, but be enriched as much as possible by it, even though you don't endure it, for the purpose of, to the degree that you are enriched by it, you will be able to enrich others. And if you try to seek an escape from it before you are enriched or matured, there will be people that won't benefit from what God has done in your life to the degree that they could. So just as Paco says, endure it, even if you can't enjoy it, so that you may be enriched by it. Yeah,
certainly. And once you've made it through, don't stop talking about it, right? Keep proclaiming, keep confessing, keep testifying of what God has brought you through. Yeah. Because people need to hear it. People need to hear that what they're going through, they can make it out. Yeah. Yeah. That there's hope. There's a future. Sometimes in really difficult, trying times, it can at times feel like there's no end to this. There's no way out. This is going to be the end of me. This is going to be the end of, whatever. We can feel defeated. We can feel like there's no open doors. Like that's it. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna die here. There's no way out. But when they see somebody that's made it through, it provides hope. It reignites, that fire that, hey, I got to keep fighting, got to keep standing, got to keep believing. Yeah, there's a way out.
Keep trusting. Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning of our conversation about hope and the kingdom, is that when you're in something and you're looking for hope, if you look to the kingdom, you see a kingdom coming towards you. And so oftentimes painful situations, they're helpless situations. They're situations that we feel powerless in, immobilized by. And so when you see a kingdom coming towards you, you realize in that moment, it doesn't matter if you get out of it. Because God's coming into it. You know what I mean? Like the reality is that this world, like we ain't getting out of this world. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like God's kingdom is coming into it. Yeah. And so if this world gets hard and gets deteriorated, like even if we can't escape this, like there's no express line to Mars at the moment. Elon Musk, no matter what
he's working on it.
They're trying to do their best, to get an escape route to build a better world elsewhere. Right. Ain't gonna happen.
Nope.
Ain't gonna happen.
Nope.
And so but that's okay.
Yeah.
Because God's coming into it. Yeah. So even if we can't escape our trial, even if we can't escape our affliction, our weakness, it's all good. I don't say that glibly, because God's coming into it, and he's coming into it in a powerful way. Yeah. So if you've got things that you're wrestling with, even if you do wrestle with them for the rest of your life, which could be the case. Yeah. It was the case with Paul, Apostle Paul. He said, I have a personal weakness, a thorn in the flesh. I've pleaded with God to get me out of that, or get that out of me. Right. And God says, no, I'm coming into it. Yeah. I'm coming in. And so that's the reality, is that even if we don't get out, God's coming in. Yeah. And he's beautiful, man. And that does warrant rejoicing.
Yeah. Beautiful. I kept thinking of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's interesting. The story says that there was a fourth person in the fire with them, right? And he looked like the Son of Man, right? And it's interesting. It didn't say that fourth person pulled them out of it, right? They were able to look inside, and all four of them were inside. That fourth person didn't pull them out. He was in there with them. You know what I mean? He was in there with them. Yes. Could he have pulled them out of that? Sure. Yeah. Well, maybe the deeper story is that, when you do go through times of trial, difficulty, when you feel like you're in the fire, when you feel like you're in the furnace, he's with you. God's with you.
100%.
Yeah. The pulling out, the escape may not come when you want it, but don't worry about it. That doesn't mean you're alone. He's in there with you.
Yeah, exactly. And when he's in there with you, it doesn't mean to say that the space has suddenly become like a happy, helium balloon filled place, birthday party, you know, like that fire was still the fire.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
It was still confusing. It was still wild. It was still, there was no structure to that space. There was no certainty to that space. But what there was is there was Jesus in it. There was purpose in it. There was hope in it. There was holiness in it. You know, that furnace became holy ground. And so if you're going through a difficult time, I would never ever encourage somebody to say stiff upper lip, deny the pain. I would never encourage anybody to suppress the sorrow, deny the pain. I would embrace it all. Embrace the pain, embrace the grief, the tears, the angst, whatever it is that experience is evoking within you. Allow yourself to feel it, because God exists in it. That's what he exists in. He exists in that humanity. He exists in that brokenness. He exists in those tears. He exists in those questions, in that confusion. That's where he abides. So if we allow ourselves to accept, to embrace the truth of that experience, we will find him in it. We find him in our tears. You know what I mean? We find him in our brokenness, and sometimes we find him broken with us. We find him breaking with us. We find in our tears we find him. If we allow ourselves to experience it truly, there are times that we can hear him weeping with us.
Yes,
we feel his brokenness for our brokenness. So brave faces, I'm not a fan of a brave face. I'm a fan of honesty, authenticity, but the tenacity also to experience, and the insistence of experiencing beauty in spite of our brokenness.
Yeah. Well said. Great. I really just only have maybe a one more question, maybe two more questions. And this just has to do with just the church, where the state of the church is at right now. I want to know, what do you see God doing right now? We talk a lot about, the strain and the stresses that the church is experiencing, but what do you see or perceive God is actively doing and working in the world and in the church?
Yeah, 100%. Well, first of all, God is not afraid. He's not fearful. He's moving. He's advancing.
Yeah.
He is the most hopeful entity, personality in all of creation. He knows what he's doing. He's doing it. There's nothing that can stop him from accomplishing his will and his purpose. And I think what he is wanting us to do is primarily, first and foremost, is to trust him. Is that if things are falling apart around us, like if there is if things are breaking down within society and within culture, I think it's perfectly okay to grieve it. It's okay to grieve the loss of a culture that we once had. It's okay to grieve a world that is relinquishing Judeo-Christian norms. That I think it's okay to be broken for the state of the world. It's okay to grieve, and I think it's right that we should feel deeply and be concerned about what's going on around us and how the norms of our society are shifting and changing. But again, we have to ask ourselves, like, where is our hope? You know what I mean? Like, now is not the time to transition our hope to a political figure. Yeah. Or to an ideology that's just sprung up within the last 30, 40 years. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Or many people are just simply transitioning their hope from one institution to another institution. Sure. They're transitioning their hope from a church, from from the institution of the church to either a political institution or some other kind of ideology. And I just think that our hope never belonged in a place that originated on earth. Anyway, I just think our hope it should be invested in God. So I think we should put our hope in him, in what he's doing and how he's advancing, because I truly believe the best is yet to come. I truly believe that God will God's beauty is yet to be unveiled. And I just honestly believe that God does his best work at the worst times. You know what I mean? And I think with regards to the church, like, you know, I think we need discipline. You know what I mean? I think we have constructed and invested our love and affection in some really silly places. And I just think, even if those are good things, you know, if they become primary things, they become idols. And so I just think it's God is inviting us back to establish our hope, our heart affections in him and what he's going to do. So I think it's time to look at him, see how he's moving, see how he's working, have our hearts reignited by his beauty, by his mercy. It's a great time to be uncoupled from convention. It's a great time to be uncoupled from the world. It's a great time to be bound again to the beauty of Jesus Christ. It's a great time to find the divine in the everyday. It's a great time to find eternal truths, you know, in a broken world. So it's a good time for us to rediscover the person and the beauty, the character and the affection of God, and to simply participate in how that is lived out, how that experience of him is lived out in our day to day. So super encouraged when I look to him. And I just think the power of his gospel is so potently beautiful that I just think, in one sense, God is wrestling, is taking back from the church to one degree that which we have not managed too well. So I think he's gonna take out of our hands that which we have not stewarded so well. And maybe even give it to others that will articulate it and be freed up from some of the things that we've confined ourselves in. So that's one of the things I think is happening. So I'll finish with this kind of little metaphor. So when Peter was in prison, right? So he's in prison, he's encased, and God sent a hurricane to shake the building. So you got to imagine initially when the earthquake came, that Peter had no idea that earthquake was sent as in response to prayer. All Peter felt was shaking.
Right.
You know, that's all he felt was shaking.
Yeah.
All he experienced was dust on his head. Were the screams, the panic yelps of his inmates and his guards. Was the clattering of chains, and was chaos and confusion. You got to remember, that's what Peter experienced. Right. You know, but what he wasn't aware of was that God was in liberation mode. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, like if that was me or you, Paco, we'd probably go, "What the heck, man?"
I'd be terrified for sure.
Yeah, you'd be like, "I'm in prison. I'm in prison." And if that's not bad enough, not only am I in prison, but I'm chained. I'm chained up during an earthquake. You know, this is it. Yeah. And he didn't initially realize that God had sent a shaking to liberate him, to break the chains off. And as the church, I think that's a metaphor for us. There's a shaking going on, but it isn't something to be fearful of. It's a holy moment that I believe we should trust that God is sending the shaking to shake off the chains. And to set us free, to release us from that which has bound us, whether it be in convention or our national culture. But he's in a process of setting us free.
Man, that's great. I think that's a really important thing for us to hear, to start, in a sense, adopting that perspective, adopting that view, that reality, that no matter what, the kingdom is advancing. The kingdom of God is progressing forward despite what's kind of happening in our, in our world, our culture, or whatever. And then just also understanding that, like, God is moving. God's moving.
100%.
Yeah, things are being shaken, but maybe the shaking is so that the church can, in a sense, step out into freedom, into what He's called us out to be and or to do.
100%. You see it. You see that as a pattern all throughout church history, throughout history period. But yeah, I mean, we often go back to the time of persecution for the early Christians and how they were just mass shaking, but they were actually set free to proclaim the gospel throughout the known world at that time. Very uncomfortable, very painful, many tears, much confusion, and yet incredible witness, incredible movements by God, a transformation of nations. And so we trust God. Awesome.
Well, Justin, is there anything else you want to say before we finish off this episode?
Just that I really appreciate hanging out with you, Paco. I think you're a cool guy, and even if you do like pretentious coffee drinks.
Yeah, I'm not alone in that. There's a whole tribe of us that love weird, wacky, amazing coffee that doesn't always taste great.
Just let me know and I'll bring my French press along.
Fantastic. For next episode, we'll make sure we do that.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thanks so much for being here today, for joining in and sharing, what God has kind of laid on your heart, for also just being vulnerable and sharing your story with all of our listeners. And I really feel that people will be able to receive encouragement. They'll be able to know that their trial that they may be going through, there's a purpose behind it. There's a greater purpose. It'll have a ripple effect as they walk through that with Jesus, as they walk through that, hand in hand with Jesus, even in the midst of the discomfort, even in the midst of the pain, even in the midst of the brokenness, that all of those things play a role in this greater story, the story of redemption, the story of power, where God is essentially revealing Himself to the world, to those around. So I feel like there's so much to kind of glean from all of what you said, and really just there's so much to just be encouraged from. So just really appreciate it. Just curious if anybody wants to get a hold of you for anything. Is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah, just email me, justin.docherty@usw.salvationarmy.org.
Perfect. Awesome. Are you on the socials, Justin?
Not really.
Yeah.
Nah, not really. No, if you do check me out on the social media, you'll just see pictures of my children.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for listening in. If you have any questions or have some topics you would like to hear discussed in the future, you're welcome to reach out to us. Be sure to follow us on all our social media platforms. On YouTube, search California South Division. On Facebook at California South Division. And on Instagram at California South Division. Anything that we've talked about in this episode will be linked in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube for updates on new episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon for another episode. Peace.